Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Mokwariola. On special days and occasions when red carpets are rolled over unresolved issues, African countries often take time out to celebrate the process and reflect on the journey so far. Today, history takes us back to the midnight of September the 30th, 1960, when Britain's Union Jack was lowered as Nigeria became the 26th sovereign state in Africa, the 13th member of the Commonwealth, and the 96th associate of the United Nations. And so we ask, what are your thoughts on how Nigeria has fared as a nation since it gained independence since 1960? You can join the conversation and share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC News NG. We take a report, and Africa Today will continue. Welcome on board.
Today is a day of celebration and solemn reflection. It is the anniversary of the day Nigerians realized one of the most cherished of human desires, the desire for freedom. We, therefore, give thanks to and remember our founding fathers who labored so hard and sacrificed so much to build and bequeath to us this wonderful nation. It is our duty to consolidate this great legacy. On this 1st October date, and on the eve of the start of the general election cycle, we should do well to reflect on what bound us together and the great strength our diversity bestows on us. Ours is an ambitious nation, and as citizens, we have every right to look forward to the future with confidence and optimism, which are well-founded considering where we find ourselves today.
Welcome back. Now, before we get into the discussion of the day, let's update you on some of the top news stories around Africa. ICC prosecutors have urged judges not to toss out the case against former Ivory Coast President Laurent Gbagbo and a former government minister on trial for alleged involvement in deadly violence that erupted after the disputed 2010 presidential election. Eritrea's foreign minister has called for sanctions against his country to be lifted as a result of the peace deal with Ethiopia and demanded compensation for the economic hardship. Cameroon's restive Anglophone regions are in lockdown as separatists prepare to celebrate the one-year anniversary of a symbolic independence declaration just a week before nationwide presidential polls. Now joining me to look at Nigeria at 58 years as an independent nation, I have Jiti Ogunye, lawyer, social commentator, and a human rights activist. And on Skype, I have Nweke, Nigerian-born politician based in Belgium. Good to have you gentlemen on the program.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great. Now let me begin with you now, GT. Nigeria is 58. And the president a while ago gave us a televised broadcast earlier today. And it seemed like everything, even though it has been tough, we're almost getting there. But from your own analysis, how would you say Nigeria has fared from 1960 till now?
Badly.
Why?
Badly. And we hope that we can start faring better from now. So I'm optimistic that the future may be good, but badly up to now. Why? From a peacefully negotiated independence in 1960 that led to the lowering of the Union Jack and the hosting of the green, white, green, Nigeria emerged with a lot of promise. So independence had its promises. But within a short space of time, the promises of independence were betrayed by a ruling class and the political class that seem not to be aware of where the black man should stand excuse me, in the sun. And so within 2 years, Nigeria was already engulfed in political crisis, the Western regional crisis, which was not resolved, leading to the incarceration of an entire opposition party because of the authoritarian intolerance of the government at the center. Because that's a historical fact, which then led to a chain of events. The Western regional crisis, the election of 1964 general election, the 1965 Western regional election, the Operation Nweke and the violence and the Civil War. And after the Civil War, then 13 years of military rule in 1979. 4 years thereafter, the military came back, and then we had another 16 or 17 straight year of military rule, a pernicious military rule for that matter. And in 1999, when we were going to see the back of the military eventually, it was the military class that ended up producing those who inherited political power. And we have not even recovered from that, even today. So we've had this checkered history. And although the blessing of oil boom had come, helping Nigeria along the way, so with infrastructure, the Gowon era, all the bridges you have in Lagos, then the Federal Capital Territory built up and all that. Largely, all the promises that we had at independence, which could have put us at par, or even far ahead of countries like Singapore, Malaysia, or countries that had independence around the same time as we had, those promises had been betrayed. And so if you look at it totally, Nigeria is not where
it should be.
It should be. And so we shouldn't celebrate that we just have life. If longevity alone is what determines success, then you can be 100 years and then claim that you are successful. But if in 100 years in a century, you've not achieved what 20-year-olds should achieve, that certainly cannot be called a success of your life. So, and this is not an attempt to condemn my country. Every Nigerian that is not happy with how Nigeria has filtered away its opportunities, boundless opportunities, should be seen as a patriot rather than somebody who is not patriotic in the country. So I think that we can, reverse this trend, we can change course, and we can move in another direction. And I hope that because political power is central to a lot of things,
right,
including how you shape the economy. There's this discourse in sociology, in social science about the relationship between the economy and politics. So which one is the basis and then which one is the superstructure. But, the two, work together.
Right.
Politics shapes the economy, development drives how a country will improve on its lots and all that. And the economy also reinforces how the political culture, the political stature of a country will work in sync. But on both counts, we've lost it. On our economy, for example, we've just been a country of people who consciously loot their treasury to go and acquire assets overseas. Who is the British Prime Minister that you've seen or leader? In spite of the fact that they cherish summer, they cherish warm climate, that has come to Nigeria to buy a house. We crazy people to that extent. So we buying property all over the world and we say, how many houses are you going to occupy?
In as much as you have this sentiment, on the negatives that we see in Nigeria today, some would say it is still something we still have something worth celebrating, even though it's not all good. But still, there should be something we should celebrate as a people.
People, even as individuals may celebrate life. When people have their back against the wall and they're having it very tough, they say, thank God for life.
Absolutely.
That's what we usually say. But I'm saying that that's not enough to celebrate as a country. If you're failing, you can't say that, oh, I thank God that I'm a living failure. I'm alive anyway, so tomorrow will be better. That's not something that you celebrate. And for me, each time we have this independence anniversary, it should be a time of sober reflection. It should be a time for us to have introspection, deep introspection. We should do away with the fanfare and the parade and the celebration and all that. Maybe for children of school ages and all that, who cherish such things, who want to march and all that, maybe that's good for them. But for adults, for us, who've seen our country, you know.
We should try and make a change in us people. Okay, let me quickly bring in the thoughts of Collins Nweke, who joins me now via phone. Collins, from the perspectives of Jiti Ogunye, it's more or less of gloom, you know, even though we're still yet to get to the brighter side of the country as we celebrate 58 years. But what's your position on how Nigeria has fared in the last 58 years?
Thank you, Esther, for having me, and indeed, thank you for devoting this program to this very important thing. I really wish I could disagree with GT there with you in the studio, but I couldn't. I couldn't disagree with him because indeed all that is said made sense in terms of the picture of doom, more or less, that Nigeria, you know, has become. Now, I also agree with the fact that I think we are at a point as a nation where we need to do away with the fanfare and actually map out the right direction for Nigeria. Now, I think when you look at the history of Nigeria from independence up until now, which is 58 years, what you are going to see is actually, or the conclusion you are going to draw is that we have been on as an experiment. But it does look like when the experiment is done and dusted, that we do not draw the right conclusions as to, you know, what things need to change. I mean, there is no way for anybody to know that when the first constitution that was bequeathed to Nigeria, you know, the independence constitution, that it was going to work. You will only know that by the time you put it to test. But then the test will become credible at the time you sit down. I mean, the political elites sit down, evaluate what is going wrong, and begin to credibly think of how to sort those problems out and you know, move the nation forward. Now that brings me to the key issue that Nigeria is experiencing at this moment, and that is the issue of restructuring versus referendum. Now, it is clear to everybody, even the blind, could see that the nation as it is constructed today isn't working. But nobody seems to have the nerve to come out and say, let us go forward in a way that restructures this whole experiment and bequeath to Nigeria a nation that is capable of building an economy that will thrive, a nation that will be able to inject in its fabric all the structures that make you know, corruption an impossibility. I mean, we keep talking about corruption, but the structure isn't there to avert corruption. We have a system that actually fits it. Those are the sort of things that need to be addressed, and in my books, you hardly can address those if you do not sit down once and tell yourself the truth, and the truth is that we need to restructure the country for us to be able to make progress.
Right, that's a fine place to hold your thought now. We need to go on a very quick break. You're watching Africa Today, and we've been looking at Nigeria at 55 years as an independent nation. Welcome back. Ghana's independence earlier before the rest on the 6th of March 1957, the Gold Coast became the first sub-Saharan African country to gain its independence from European colonization in the 20th century. Between January and December of 1960, 17 sub-Saharan African nations, including 14 former French colonies, attained self-rule, which has left talking points on whether independence has turned out to be a blessing or a burden. Now, with this analysis, GT, there's this perception that perhaps we are not yet out of the colonial imperialism. more or less. We still have some colonial grips, even though we're still independent, as it were. Do you share that sentiment?
Yes, actually, it's called a neo-colonial era, a new colony. Yes, we're no longer subjugated by the political authority of those countries that colonized us via the 1885 Berlin Conference partition of Africa. But truth be told, economically, we're still not independent. And as a matter of fact, politically, in certain respect, we're not independent.
Can you share with us what you mean by that? How do you mean we're politically not independent?
Okay, look at Nigeria. Nigeria, yes, truly, we gained independence in 1960, flag independence, I call it. Political independence, not economic independence in a way. And by 1963, we became a republic. And so we could elect our own leaders and so on and so forth. However, in terms of the political decisions we take in our country, at very critical junctures in our political history, we've seen direct interference or our kowtowing to foreign powers. And that was why in 1975, 15 years after independence, Murtala Mohammed gave that defiant speech in Angola, in OAU conference to propel the independence of other countries in Africa, particularly countries in the Southern African sub-region, who had to go through grueling wars to attain their own independence. So that's why I said our independence was peacefully negotiated. Angola, Namibia, now South Africa,
But there's this perception.
They had to go through all that. So the point is that even as recently as the last election in 2015, it was rather symbolic of that difference or kowtowing that Obama had to be addressing Nigeria directly to tell us on how to behave to conduct our election. When do you see Nigerian leaders interfering in Americans' election to tell them how they should behave when they are conducting elections? Or European countries, right? Including those countries that are behind the Iron Curtain, in the Eastern Bloc before embracing liberal democracy, meaning that they're still torturing, they're just infants, Democrats, so to speak. So how many times have you seen African countries dictating to them or sending election observers to them?
So what do you think is responsible for this apron strings, more or less?
It's because truly at independence, those who became our leaders didn't quite understand the need to break loose. Yes, we had the situation then, didn't call for an outright breaking ties. Right. That's not what I'm saying. Yeah. But that if we had realized that the final analysis were a new sovereign state and that we should develop ourselves like a sovereign state should develop itself, things could have been different.
By this,
that's why some of the Asian tigers did. That's why India was different. Because India also gained independence in 1947.
So, but what practical approach are you suggesting we should have adopted if we were to remain as a sovereign state?
The practical approach we should adopt as a sovereign state is that we should have, as a country, developed our capacity to self-govern. And you don't develop a capacity to self-govern without providing education for your people.
Right.
So that in a short period of time, they can then catch up with the world. But our leaders came to power seeing us as a market for finished products. And so that notion has been sustained over the years. Even now, you hear people talking about we want to attract investment. We're not talking about how we're going to produce things and then capture the markets from elsewhere. That is the problem. That's why yellow racists are now leaving us behind. And that's why, only recently, in Zambia, where Kenneth Kanda wrote a book, Zambia Shall Be Free. This is very instructive. What we are hearing from Zambia now is that the Chinese are going to take over the country. It's like a recolonization because Zambia has defaulted many times. He couldn't pay his debts, so they are taking over the airport now. They've taken over the radio station. So that means we surrender ourselves all over again to colonization, not of the Anglo-Saxon people, now of the Asians. So we ought to have realized that from the word go, that if we needed to develop ourselves, we have to rely on our own strengths and our own resources, and we have to put in place programs that will accelerate development of our people in terms of social development, economic development, even educational development, so that in terms of our human capacity, we could then excel and even export expertise to the rest of the world. Right,
that's a good point there taken from you. But let's quickly come to you now, Collins Nweke. From what he's just pointed out, clearly we need to talk about good governance. And talking about good governance, how can we as a people get involved to ensure that we get what we want as a people and as a country altogether?
Yes, as a matter of fact, Jiti touched on that quite robustly when he talked about the need for us as a nation, starting from the political elites, to make education a priority, whereby the people are empowered. Now, I must say that even though the progress is slow, there are indications indeed that the ordinary Nigerians are getting more and more empowered, more and more vocal. Let's not forget that only recently the campaign called Not Too Young to Run, actually played out before our very eyes. And initially, there were signs that it was going to fail, but ultimately, it succeeded, and it succeeded in such a big way that even Mr. President actually, mentioned it in his, independence speech. Now, that said, I must point out that it does look like at the initial stage, the founding fathers did a very great job. The individuals, the leaders that took on the reign of governance, did the bit that they could. There were a number of oversights, but somewhere in between, I believe that we lost it because power now, went to the hands of people whose patriotic instincts are actually questionable. I do not want to say outright that they are unpatriotic Nigerians, but there are reasons to believe also that most of them acted either in self-interest or in the interest of other powers, which was actually the initial question you raised during this second segment.
Yeah, Collins, but in a nutshell, how can we turn things around? Because this is a tale we've been talking about as a country for too long. How can we turn things around to ensure that we bequeath a nation to the next generation?
Two things. Number one, I believe that the civil society of Nigeria need to continue along the line that they have established, in the last decade, and actually growing more and more up to the last year or two. People should get more involved. The indifference that you see amongst Nigerians needs to stop. Now, I believe also that there is a huge deposit of Nigerian resources, human capital resources outside Nigeria. Nigeria needs to continue their current efforts to ensure that these human resources deposited outside Nigeria, which is the diaspora, that they are involved more, because they bring in with them a new set of experience unencumbered by all the political vagaries that has, taunted and tainted Nigeria in the last period. They come in with a breath of fresh air. So that's on the side of the civil society.
All right.
Now, political reforms, like I mentioned, ab initio, is also very, very important, because that is the foundation that you build a strong politics, a strong economy.
All right,
if we continue to ignore it, I think we are continuing to ignore our, realistic development.
All right, let's leave it at that point for now. Thank you very much, Collins Nweke, for your thoughts on Africa today. But before we sign out, Jiti, final words, what would you have to say to close the show?
Well, with 58 years, the past might have been unsatisfactory, but the future is for us to remake and take and then shape our destiny as the most populous black nation on earth, which indeed can be a beacon of hope to the black humanity all over the world.
That's a fine place to leave it as well. Jiti Ogunye, we appreciate your analysis. Lawyer, social commentator, and human rights activist. And a while ago, I had Collins Nweke, Nigerian-born politician based in Belgium. Thank you, gentlemen, for your thoughts and contribution on Africa today.
Yes, my pleasure.
The dawn of independence in Africa came with great expectations that political freedom would translate into economic dividends, and at 58, Nigeria is as good as a grown man with 3 wives, 36 children, and 2 years left before official retirement from public service. Well, stuck between the transgressions of previous administrations and the shortcomings of present administrators, there is no better time than now to reflect on the essence of independence and use it as a wake-up call to ensure that the labor of the heroes past aren't in vain. Well, that is our package for tonight. But don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC News NG, and follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one again, I am Esther Omokwariola, and always remember, Africa can only get better.